So pardon me if there's any mistakes or bad filming. So I'm about to get started on this painting of a glass of dishes, dirty dishes, which I think is the most beautiful thing in the world, and I've been trying to get my husband to do this for a very long time. So I'm using my hands, as you can see, as a viewfinder to kind of measure where I want everything to fit on the canvas. And you can't see exactly what I see, but shows you what I'm doing in my process. So the way I'm framing this is the water, the top of the water is right about in the middle of the canvas. And I want the glass to fall about here so that we can see the continued reflections underneath. And this will give enough room to have the taller silverware coming up and not creating a tangent with the top. So there should be a little bit of breathing room if I plan this correctly. And I'm just gonna focus in on the glass today. I don't really feel like the other elements in the scene really matter at this point, so here we go. And the pencil that I'm using is, it's a color race. I don't know if you can see it, but this is just a light blue. It's called a, I don't know. I don't know what it's called, but it's a light blue color. And I was using a red before, but I got kind of annoyed that you kept seeing it through light washes. So I'm trying a little bit of a lighter one this time. So approaching the scene, I want to get in some of the darks, I think, first. And each time is going to be a little bit different. I don't always have the same methods going in. But I'm going to get in the bottom, I believe, just to kind of give an anchor point. And then I'm going to get in some of the silverware in a very light wash, just so we can kind of see. There's a fork there, here's a spoon, and all the while I'm looking at kind of the negative shapes around the stuff. So the spoon goes up like that, and then it goes, there's some, looks like a knife or fork, and it gets a little distorted as you go into the water. Things seem to appear bigger. There's a knife in behind there, this here, and this is just to block it in so that I can start working on the space around it. There's some more silverware in the back. Again, looking at the negative shapes. And that's pretty accurate. Good enough. So now that I have this kind of blocked in, I'm still looking at the shapes that I can fill in. And I want to start working on the shape around it, the entire negative shape. That's my cat. His name's Kuda. He's a big crybaby. So I'm working in a very light wash right now, as I pretty much always do. You want to start with light washes and build up the paint as you are more confident in the placements of everything. got a little bit of yellow in there, an accident, and you see little flecks of burnt umber. I don't really care right now about that kind of stuff. I'm just at this point trying to fill in the space, all the white areas. And I noticed this color is actually pretty similar to what I'm seeing. So I'm going to use this wash and very lightly go into this area. But I'm going to try to protect the whitest whites, which are this top area up here. Most likely I'll be going over it anyway. I can see as I squint that this is looking a little too squat. So I'll probably try to get a little bit darker and everything around it just to push it back and define the shape of the item a little better. And I sometimes use like angles of my brush to see how far things are, and like I would compare this angle to down here and measure my brush, see if it lines up in the right spot, and it kind of helps with proportions too. And I'm working on a Arches cold press watercolor block, in case anyone's wondering. Nobody's really watching right now yet because I'm new to this platform, but usually people ask me about that kind of stuff. And things aren't super centered, so I might try to go and fix that a little bit. Some of this can be fixed with the framing anyway. Like you can crop in slightly more on this side than this side. It's kind of a cheater way to do it. Oops. Okay. And I'm going to put in this whitish wall behind it. Added a little bit of yellow. Give it some kind of warmth. Yellow ochre to be exact. And I kind of like this window behind it, so I might keep that. Burn it out a little bit. I like to use a paper towel to get rid of some of the paint if I want it to be lighter. And I'm using this really bright blue Adding a little bit of yellow ochre. And at least now you can kind of see why this spot would be so light. All right. Yes, Kuda. It's been very whiny all day. So this glass has a lot of really interesting things going on. I've never quite tackled something like this. It's got kind of a foggy look to it. So I want to keep the edges pretty light if I can, especially as we go back here. So I'm working a lot of wet and wet techniques. So that it all kind of blends in together. And it looks like I probably want to go back in around it, around the shape of the glass, just to give a little more definition. But first, I think I'm going to work on the silverware a little more. And the silverware is where I see some of the darkest darks. So it's good to get these in there now. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just kind of placement. You can see a hint of the... I'm really sorry about my cat. He's super annoying today. Sorry, Kuda. You are, though. So I'm just putting in hints of the silverware. And it's kind of got this warmth to it. So I'm going to try to get that in there. You can see this fork behind. And it gets a little distorted. All right, so we've got that blocked in. Now I'm gonna go back into the background because I want it to be pushed back, and I feel like I should work from that point forward. Because the paint on top will help sharpen the edges where I want. Adding a little bit of red to this blue. And I don't know how detailed I'm gonna get. I think I'm gonna leave it pretty sloppy. As long as we have a nice sharp edge. That's all I'm looking for. And I'm trying to get the angle correct. It's a little bit lighter here. I know, Kuda. My poor animals. I want to get rid of some of these visible brush strokes. It's just a personal preference. Squinting right now to get this angle right. And I'm gonna let that kind of bleed down. So I'm not being too picky about if the paint goes over a certain spot, because all this is going to be thicker applied paint. Oh my God. And this is all very wet, using a lot of wet on wet. This gets a little lighter so you can see this reflection kind of forming from the glass. And this is slightly lighter, but still a little bit darker. So you can understand the quality of the glass. Kind of hinting in the water line at this point. And I'm going to try to soften these edges because they're not quite that visible. I just wanted to really define this lighter part. And I'm going to even lighten this up a bit. As well as carry it through. Add a hint of this, sorry, wrong. A little bit of blue. if I squint, I can barely see this fork in the background. Going in and really trying to push the curve of this glass. I had a teacher in college that was always very picky about your ellipses, and he would make us draw it over and over until it was perfectly round. I still don't do it very well, but I think of him, at least when I'm working on that kind of stuff. And now I'm going to go back up into this spot, because when I squint, it's actually quite a bit darker. Maybe not that dark. Oh, maybe it is. And it's also going to let me... I am really sorry about my cat. He's extra special. Some of this is dripping in because I worked a little bit too wet on wet there. And if I can, I'm going to try to take this time as an opportunity to soften this edge, because I don't want it to stand out too much. I try to keep in mind of my focal point and what I want to say. And right now, the most important part to me is the silverware and the glass. So there's some funky textures going on here right now. Oh my god. All right. Now I can start working on the lightest lights that I see, which is right here. And it's still got a hint of blue. And there's a little bit of light coming through. And then this edge of the glass is super bright. And the back edge is light, but it's not the brightest part. So I darkened it a little. And it is not a perfect rounded line, but it's good enough. Sorry. Just realized that this part right here needs to be darkened along with the rest. And it looks like I'm going to need to go over this background again. At least right here. I might leave a little bit of this weird stuff that's going on because it's kind of cool. So putting in some of these darks, and as it goes into the water, it's a little bit foggier and lower contrast. So right now I'm trying to pay attention to where I'm seeing the sharper lines and where it's kind of fading off. So there's another fork back here, but the darker parts are actually the negative space in between the prawns. Which is kind of interesting because it's opposite of this one, where the darker parts are the prawns. And it gets a little lighter. And defines the shape of another utensil behind it, or in front of it. So right now I'm pretty much just looking at the negative spaces. And you can barely see the lip of this glass. You can see the lighter part of it here. A little bit of a hint over here. Hope that's not too blurry. There's some light on the bottom here of the glass, and I don't have a mouth stick. Well, I do, but I never use it. Okay, so see a little bit of light on this spoon and on the edge of this knife as well. There's a fork back here, and if I squint, it's really hard to tell because it's so light, but you can see that this part is lighter than the blue water behind it. But there is a spot where the water actually gets lighter than the fork, and this is all very, very subtle. So I'm using my finger to blend a little bit. Don't know if I really recommend doing that. It's probably not great for you. But the edges back here are very soft. In fact, this is probably still too dark. So I'm going to try to lighten this a little bit. And keep in mind that the values change pretty drastically with gouache, depending on the paint that you have underneath it. So I'm hoping that this will dry a little bit darker than what you're seeing, and just kind of pay attention to that. So this fork actually goes all the way up here. And there's a knife in there too. So the knife starts up here. This is all very delicate work right now. The values are so close together. You just have to be super mindful of everything. You don't want anyone to be too dark or attract too much attention. So now that I have this going pretty good, I actually want a little bit of yellow ochre in there. Give it some more color. It's looking a little gray. There's actually quite a bit of warmth in this image. Okay, it's looking a little better. Going back to add a little more brightness here. It's where the light's really hitting now. kind of going with thicker paint to get the brightest brights, which are all right up here for the most part. The key with silverware is to make it really high contrast. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. And it's really all about the highlights and the really dark shadows. So if I squint, I pretty much just see all the bright highlights. So now going in and adding some darks. And you'll see some of the color down here reflecting into the silverware. So I'm going in with this darker blue. But if I squint, I think this is actually lighter than the background. It's hard to tell. All right, I'm always stepping back and checking my work. Adding some of the stuff that I'm seeing, smaller details. It's always hard to get these small details. Sometimes I'll take the paper right off the easel so I can get a steadier hand. And I think I'm still going to go back into here and darkening that, because as I said before, I think it's the darkest dark. So I'm going to try to see where this line is, where the back of the wall is. And using this darker value helps kind of carve out the shapes better. So now I can go ahead and darken this area, the shadow that where the glass is hitting. And all of this is using relative colors. So what I mean by that is by making this darker, this makes it appear lighter. And by making this warmer, this appears cooler. And I'm just constantly doing stuff like that. So if you're painting something and you're thinking, well, my white just isn't white enough, it's usually not a problem with the white, but it's the relative colors around it. So to make that pop, you can darken everything around it. I want this edge to be sharper. So I'm going in and adding a little bit of darkness. All right, now that I have everything pretty much blocked in, we're almost done, but we can make this a little bit better by increasing the values a little bit. I still want it to be pretty foggy. So I'm gonna kind of do a lot of wet on wet techniques for this. Blend it a little bit. make this fork stand out a little more. And I'm hoping that it darkens a little bit so it doesn't stand out quite that much. And try to sharpen the edge of this knife a little bit. All right. So I think I'm pretty much done with this part, and I might go ahead and leave that alone, but I can add a little more excitement to this spot. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to add a little bit of the reflections that I'm seeing down here. And they're very light, so I'm hoping this darkens a little bit. Okay. So now I'm going to try to add a little bit of warmth up here. Our kitchen is a lot of this old 80s or 90s looking wood. So there's actually a lot of warm reflections coming from it. And these details aren't really necessary, but personally I like to tell the story behind it. I think it's kind of cool if you can look at a painting and understand a little bit about the room, about, you know, the space around it. And it's stuff that you don't really realize. But if you look closer, it's all there. There's a lot more detail than at first glance, I think. It's easy to get lost in the silverware rendering because there's so many reflections and things going on in it. But just remember to keep squinting and to simplify. Hopefully I can listen to my own advice. Okay, I'm still stepping back and forth, squinting and trying to get the right values to make this thing pop. And you can see at this point the paint is a lot thicker than when I started. And that's exactly what you want to do. Or at least that's what I want to do. So I'm going over all these highlights again, pushing the values a bit. And I think it's starting to look like silverware. Sorry, I'm deep in thought right now. I lied. I said I wasn't going to work on this part anymore, but I am. So I think I'm almost done. Adding this. I'm not quite happy with this silverware. I think it needs a little more darkness to it. And go back into this part a little bit. having a slightly wonky line can kind of ruin a painting, in my opinion. So I try to fix it as much as I can. Alright, I think that's about it. I'm gonna call this one good. Thanks everyone who hung in there to watch. Sorry about my annoying cat.